The rain on the windshield wasn't falling. It was attacking. Each drop exploded against the glass like a tiny water balloon, a stark contrast to the perpetual, sun-drenched smog of Los Angeles. Declan Hayes gripped the steering wheel of his modest rental car, his knuckles white. For a man whose face was on billboards worldwide, he felt remarkably small, a single, insignificant speck in the vast green expanse of the Pacific Northwest. He'd driven north from Seattle for hours, the navigation app on his phone his only guide. His agent had arranged this, a digital detox, she'd called it, a chance to breathe after the unfortunate online discourse. Declan called it hiding. A scandal, manufactured from a few out-of-context photos and a vindictive ex-co-star had blown up, and his publicist's advice was to vanish until it blew over. The town of Cedar Cove appeared through the mist like a forgotten postcard. Population 2,317. A single main street boasted a diner, a hardware store, a post office, and a bookstore that looked like it had been there for a century. It was perfect. No one would look for three-time Oscar nominee Declan Hayes here. He'd rented a cabin on the edge of a crystalline lake, all rough-hewn logs and a stone fireplace. It was cold, quiet, and utterly isolating. After 2 days of pacing, watching the rain, and rereading the same script he was supposed to be memorizing for his next role, a profound restlessness set in. He needed to move, to be around people, even if he couldn't talk to them. That's how he found himself, on a drizzly Tuesday afternoon, pushing open the heavy oak door of the Quiet Page bookstore. A bell jingled softly overhead. The smell hit him first, the sacred, comforting aroma of old paper, binding glue, and lemon-scented wood polish. It was a small space, crammed floor to ceiling with books, with haphazard stacks forming makeshift aisles. It was the antithesis of the sleek minimalist spaces he was used to. "Be right with you," a voice called from somewhere behind a tall shelf labeled Local Authors and Forgotten Histories. Declan flinched, pulling the brim of his beanie lower. He shoved his hands in his pockets and wandered towards the fiction section, his gaze skimming the spines. He was playing a reclusive writer in his next film, a man haunted by his past. He'd been struggling to find the character's core, feeling like an imposter in his own skin. Right now, he felt like an imposter in this quiet, honest place. Finding everything all right? Declan turned. The man who had spoken was wiping his hands on a dark green apron. He was around Declan's age, maybe a few years younger, with kind, intelligent eyes the color of rich earth behind a pair of slightly crooked wire-rimmed glasses. His brown hair was a little messy, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and he had a smudge of dust on his cheek. He was handsome in a way that felt real and uncalculated, a world away from the polished perfection of Hollywood. Yeah, just browsing," Declan said, his voice quieter than he intended. "Well, browse away. The storm's settling in for the day, so you've got time," the man said with a warm, easy smile. "Let me know if you're looking for anything specific. I'm Adrian, by the way. I own the place." "Ben," Declan said instantly, giving the fake name he'd booked the cabin under. His heart hammered against his ribs. Lying to this man with the kind eyes felt wrong. "Well, Ben, welcome. Coffee's fresh if you'd like some. It's terrible, but it's hot." Adrian gestured to a small percolator bubbling away on a counter, near the cash register. A genuine, surprised laugh escaped Declan. "Terrible coffee is a specialty of mine. I'll take a cup." Adrian poured him a mug. Their fingers brushed during the handoff, a simple, mundane contact that sent an inexplicable jolt through Declan. He'd spent years doing intimate love, scenes on camera, choreographed and lit for maximum effect, and none of it felt as electric as this accidental touch in a dusty bookshop. "So, what brings you to Cedar Cove?" Adrian asked, leaning against the counter. "Not many tourists this time of year." "Just needed a change of scenery," Declan said, sipping the coffee. Adrian was right. It was truly awful. I'm a writer. The lie came easily. It was half of his cover story. Adrian's face lit up. Really? That's fantastic. Fiction, non-fiction. Fiction, Declan said, feeling the character settle onto him like a coat. Trying to anyway, it's slow going. I get that. The blank page is a formidable enemy, Adrian nodded sympathetically. Well, you've come to the right place for inspiration, or procrastination. We're excellent for both. They talked for a few more minutes, about the rain, about books, about the best hiking trails that wouldn't be too muddy. Adrian was effortlessly engaging, his passion for stories and his town evident in every word. He wasn't trying to impress Ben, he was just being himself. Declan found himself relaxing, the tight coil of anxiety in his chest beginning to unfurl. For the first time in months, a conversation wasn't a transaction. The bell on the yabby door jingled again, and an elderly woman bundled in a yellow raincoat came in. "Afternoon, Millie," Adrian called. "Your order came in." "Oh, you angel," she replied, beaming. Adrian gave Declan an apologetic smile. "Duty calls. Feel free to stay as long as you like." Declan watched him go, helping Millie with a warmth and patience. That seemed innate. He felt a strange pang of longing. This was a real life. A simple, uncomplicated life, built on community and passion, not on box office numbers and critics' reviews. He finished his coffee and browsed for a while longer, eventually picking out a worn copy of a classic novel he'd always meant to read. He brought it to the counter just as Millie was leaving. Her new book clutched to her chest. Adrian rang him up. "Good choice. A little bleak for the weather, but a masterpiece." "I need a masterpiece to remind me what they look like," Declan said, before he could stop himself. Adrian looked up from the cash register, his gaze thoughtful, as if he were seeing past Ben's carefully constructed walls. "We all need that sometimes," he said softly. He handed Declan the book in a paper bag. "Hope the words start flowing for you." "Thanks. For the book and the terrible coffee," Declan said with a small smile. "Any time." Declan stepped back. Out into the drizzle, the paper bag held protectively under his jacket. The cabin still felt isolated and cold, but the memory of the warm, book-filled shop and Adrian's easy smile lingered. For the first time since he'd arrived, his retreat didn't feel like a prison sentence. It felt, strangely, like the beginning of something. He walked back to his car, not as Declan Hayes, the movie star in hiding, but just as a man who'd had a nice conversation in a bookstore. And for now, that was enough. Chapter 2. The Character Study, 1,500 Words. The following day, the rain had softened to a persistent mist that hung in the air, jeweling the pine needles and dampening the world into a hush. The silence in the cabin, which had felt oppressive before, now felt like an invitation. Declan found himself thinking less about the script and more about the bookstore and the bookseller with the dusty glasses and the genuine smile. He needed a reason to go back, a purpose. He picked up his script. His character, Elias, was a man who ran a small shop in a remote town, a man content with a simple life, yet burdened by a secret past. Declan had been trying to play him as brooding and mysterious, but after meeting Adrian, he wondered if he had it all wrong. Maybe contentment wasn't brooding. Maybe it was a quiet, steady warmth. Grasping the script, he drove back into town. The bell on the quiet page's door jingled its familiar, welcoming sound. Adrian was perched on a rolling ladder, reshelving a stack of hardcovers. He glanced over and his face broke into a smile. "Back so soon? Don't tell me you finished. That entire book already?" "No, not yet," Declan said, holding up the script. It was bound in a plain black cover, its title, Whisper Lake, printed in a simple, bland font. "Actually, I was hoping I could pick your brain. If you have a moment." Adrian climbed down. "A writer's brain picking? That sounds serious. Does this require the good coffee? I was joking yesterday. I can actually make a decent cup. He gestured to a French press on a small table in a cozy nook by the window. That would be a welcome upgrade, Declan admitted. A few minutes later, they were seated in two worn leather armchairs, steam rising from their mugs. Declan explained his cover story, the words feeling more real as he spoke them to Adrian. I'm writing this character. He runs a small business, in a town a lot like this one. But I'm from a big city. I think I'm getting him all wrong. He feels like a caricature. Adrian listened intently, cradling his mug. What's his name? Elias. And what's his shop? Clockmaker, Declan said, changing the details to protect his actual project. Ah, a man who deals in time, Adrian said, his eyes lighting up. That's beautiful. So, what's your question for me? Declan leaned forward. Why? Why choose this? The quiet, the sameness, the smallness of it all? Don't you ever want more? The question was for his research, but as he asked it, he realized it was also a genuine question from his own soul, tired of the constant churn of his life. Adrian considered this, looking out the window at the mist-shrouded street. It's not about choosing smallness, he said finally. It's about choosing meaning. Out there, he gestured vaguely, encompassing the world beyond Cedar Cove. The world is loud. It's easy to get lost in the noise, to have your value decided by things that don't really matter. Here, it's simple. I know my neighbors. I know that Millie loves historical romances because they're happier than her own history was. I know that the Johnson kid is saving up his allowance for that fantasy novel, and I'm keeping my last copy for him. He looked back at Declan, his expression earnest. This isn't a small life, Ben. It's a deep one. My business isn't just selling books. It's being a part of people's stories. There's nothing small about that. Declan was stunned into silence. He looked at Adrian, really looked at him. He saw the intelligence, the profound contentment, the lack of desire for any spotlight other than the warm glow of the reading lamp next to them. He saw a man completely at home in his own skin, something Declan couldn't remember ever feeling. I've never thought about it like that, he said softly. Most people don't, Adrian replied with a gentle shrug. They see quiet and think empty. But it's not. The quiet is where you can finally hear yourself think. It's where the good stuff grows. They talked for over an hour. Adrian spoke about taking over the store from his grandmother, about the struggle to keep a small business alive in the age of online retailers, about his father's initial disappointment that he hadn't pursued a more substantial career in law or medicine. He wanted stability for me, Adrian said. He thought this was a hobby, not a life. It took him years to understand that this, he said, gesturing to the shelves overflowing with books, is my stability. It's my joy. Declan felt a pang of recognition. His own father, a tough, retired steel worker from Pittsburgh, had never understood his acting career either. It's just pretend, son, he'd say, a frown on his face. When are you going to get a real job? The irony of now pretending to be a writer to hide from that very career was not lost on him. How did you get him to understand? Declan asked, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. I didn't, not for a long time, Adrian admitted. I just had to be so steadfastly happily me that he eventually had to accept that my version of a good life was just different from his. He finally came around. He's my best customer now, even though he only reads Westerns. He smiled, a little sadly. Self-acceptance, I think, has to come first, before you can ask for it from anyone else. The conversation shifted, and Adrian asked about Ben's writing. Flustered, Declan pulled from the script, weaving the fictional Elias's struggles with his own feelings of isolation and artistic doubt. It was the most truthful conversation he'd had about his work in years, even though it was all shrouded in a lie. As Declan got up to leave, feeling mentally replenished and emotionally raw, Adrian handed him a book. It was a slim volume of essays about small-town life. "For research," Adrian said, his eyes twinkling. "Thank you. For this and for the talk. You've given me a lot to think about." "Any time, Ben. Good luck with Elias." Walking back to his car, Declan felt a confusing mix of guilt and elation. Adrian's insights were a gift, unlocking his character in a way his high-priced acting coach never had. But the connection he felt was real, and it was built on a foundation of falsehood. He was studying Adrian, not just as research, but as a man, and he liked what he was discovering more and more with every passing minute. He was playing a part, but his growing feelings for the kind bookseller were terrifyingly, beautifully real. Chapter 3. The Crack in the Mask, 1,500 words. A week passed. Declan's routine solidified. Mornings wrestling with his script by the lake. Afternoons researching at the quiet page. He and Adrian had fallen into an easy rhythm. Their conversations stretched longer, moving beyond writing and books to more personal shores. They talked about their favorite childhood movies, their most embarrassing moments, their dreams that felt too silly to say out loud. Declan learned that Adrian had never left the Pacific Northwest, that he believed the best smell in the world was rain on hot pavement, and that he'd had his heart broken once by a tourist who'd promised to return and never did. With every shared secret, Declan felt the weight of his own lie grow heavier. He was also, to his own surprise, becoming a part of the town's fabric. He helped Adrian haul a new shipment of books from the curb. He was introduced to Millie properly, and received a thorough interrogation about his intentions with her favorite bookseller, which made Adrian blush a spectacular shade of red. He started recognizing people on the street, and they'd nod at Ben, the writer friend of Adrian's. He was living a life, a fragile, beautiful lie of a life. One evening, Adrian closed the shop early. "Come on," he said, grabbing a picnic basket from behind the counter. "You've been holed up in that cabin or in here for over a week. You need to see why people actually put up with all this rain." He led Declan to a bluff overlooking the ocean, a spot not marked on any tourist map. The sky was clearing, painting streaks of orange and purple over the turbulent gray water. The air was cold and sharp, smelling of salt and pine. "Wow," Declan breathed, the view stealing his words. It was more breathtaking than any CGI-generated vista he'd ever acted against. "Told you," Adrian said, unpacking sandwiches and a thermos of hot chocolate. "The world feels bigger out here, doesn't it? Puts things in perspective." They ate in comfortable silence, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. The tension that had been building in Declan all week, the guilt, the fear, the overwhelming attraction, coiled tightly in his chest. He felt closer to Adrian than he had to anyone in years, and the distance created by his secret felt like a physical chasm between them. "Can I ask you something?" Adrian said softly, breaking the silence. He was looking at Declan, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Anything," Declan said, his heart beginning to hammer. "Who are you, really?" The question landed like a physical blow. Declan froze, a piece of sandwich halfway to his mouth. What do you mean?" "I mean, Ben the writer is a nice guy," Adrian said, his voice gentle, not accusatory. "But he's careful." He holds back. "I run a bookstore, Ben. I've spent my life studying stories and the people in them. You're carrying a bigger one than you're letting on." Declan's first instinct was to deflect, to craft another elegant lie. But, looking into Adrian's honest, concerned face under the vast open sky, the lies suddenly felt cheap and pathetic. He had built this connection on a foundation of sand, and Adrian, with his quiet perception, had felt the ground shifting. He set his food down, his appetite gone. He stared out at the ocean, unable to meet Adrian's gaze. My name isn't Ben, he said, the words barely a whisper. It's Declan. Declan Hayes. The name hung in the air between them. He waited for the gasp of recognition, the wide-eyed shock, the immediate shift in dynamics that always happened. It didn't come. Adrian was silent for a long moment. Okay, he said simply. Why? The lack of reaction was more disarming than outrage would have been. Declan risked a glance at him. Adrian's face was still kind, still patient, just curious. The story tumbled out of him then, the filtered PG version suitable for YouTube monetization, but the truth nonetheless. The constant scrutiny, the paparazzi, the pressure of every move being judged. The manufactured scandal that had painted him as a villain, the crushing feeling of being nothing more than a product. I was so tired of being Declan Hayes, he confessed, his voice raw. I just wanted to be nobody for a while, to have a conversation where the person wasn't talking to a famous actor but just to me. I came here to hide. I walked into your store because I was lonely, and then I met you and you were so real and interesting. And I was so terrified that if you knew this, whatever this is, would vanish. You'd look at me like I'm a character on a screen, not a person. He finally fell silent, bracing himself for the disappointment, the anger, the hurt. Adrian took a slow sip of his hot chocolate. So all that stuff about writing? Elias? That was my next role, Declan finished, shame washing over him. I was using you for research. I'm so sorry, Adrian. It started that way, but it's not that way now. Talking to you, being with you. It's been the most real thing I've experienced in years. Adrian looked out at the ocean, his profile, silhouetted against the twilight. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the cries of gulls and the distant roar. Saw your interview on that talk show, his dad said, his voice gruff as ever. No hello. Oh yeah? Declan said, bracing for a critique. You seemed different. Different good or different bad? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. You seemed sure of yourself. Not like you were pretending to be sure. Actually sure. Your mother said you sounded happy. Declan's throat tightened. I am, Dad. Or I'm getting there. This break you took. Where was it again? A little town called Cedar Cove, in Washington. What's there? His father asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Declan smiled, looking out at the LA skyline. A lot, actually. The ocean, big trees, quiet. He took a breath. And there's this bookstore. He told his father about Adrian, not everything, but enough. About his kindness, his intelligence, his strength, about how he'd helped Declan find his footing without even realizing it. When he finished, there was another long silence. Declan waited for the disapproval, the confusion, the awkwardness. A bookseller, huh? His father finally said. Sounds like a solid man. Your mother will want to meet him. Don't be a stranger, son. The call ended, and Declan sat in, the quiet of his condo, a profound sense of peace settling over him. It wasn't a grand, sweeping acceptance, but it was a start. It was his father trying to understand. It was enough. The premiere for Whisper Lake was a spectacle of flashing lights and screaming fans. Declan walked the red carpet, smiling and waving, doing his job. But his eyes kept scanning the crowd, his heart aching for a different face. And then he saw him. Standing just behind the barrier, looking slightly overwhelmed but smiling, was Adrian. He was wearing a simple dark suit, his hair neatly combed, his glasses catching the flash of the cameras. Their eyes met across the chaos. Declan's professional smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unguarded joy. He excused himself from an interviewer and made a beeline for the barrier, ignoring the cameras that swiveled to follow him. You're here, he said, his voice full of wonder. Millie and the entire town council pooled their frequent flyer miles. They said I couldn't. Miss my boyfriend's big night, Adrian said, his cheeks flushing. I hope that's okay. The boyfriend part, and the showing up unannounced part. Declan laughed, a real hearty laugh that came from deep within. It's more than okay. He reached across the barrier and took Adrian's hand, right, in front of the entire world. The camera flashes exploded like supernovas. He didn't care. Let them take pictures. Let them write their stories. This was his truth. Later, after the film had screened to rapturous applause, they found a quiet moment on a balcony overlooking the city. The noise of the after-party was a dull hum inside. You were amazing, Adrian said, his eyes shining. I knew you would be, but wow, Declan. You were Elias. You understood him. I had a great teacher, Declan said, slipping his arm around Adrian's waist. He taught me that a life doesn't have to be big to be meaningful. It just has to be true. So what happens now? Adrian asked, leaning into his touch. The world's your oyster again. Declan looked out at the sprawling, glittering city, then down at the man in his arms. He knew now that his life wasn't about choosing between Cedar Cove and L.A., between fame and obscurity. It was about choosing himself. It was about carrying the peace he'd found within him, no matter where he went. Now, Declan said, turning, to face Adrian fully. We write the next chapter, together. It might be here sometimes. It might be in Cedar Cove sometimes. It might be complicated and messy, and we'll definitely get it wrong sometimes. He smiled, a hopeful, happy smile. But it will be ours, and it will be real. Adrian smiled back, a mirror of that hope and happiness. I like the sound of that. Under the hazy California stars, far from the quiet mist of the Pacific Northwest, they met in another kiss. It wasn't an ending. It was a promise of countless beginnings yet to come. The actor had stepped out of the shadows, not into the spotlight, but into the steady, unwavering light of love. And for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was supposed to be.